Never thought the word lockdown would become the soundtrack of my nightmares. The kind of word that clings to your skin even when you're trying to act normal in broad daylight. But before I take you into that classroom, before the door rattled, before the gunshots, before my teacher's voice hissed, sit down or you're expelled, I need you to understand what my life looked like on the surface. Because from the outside, it all seems so perfect. Family was the kind people pointed at in church pews and neighborhood barbecues with that soft, wistful look. My mom, a nurse with the kind of gentle smile that could calm screaming toddlers in the ER. My dad, a stoic mechanic whose hands were always blackened by oil but whose voice stayed steady, reassuring like nothing in the world could ever surprise him. And me, the honest kid, the girl with neat handwriting, perfect attendance, and plans to go pre-law. At least that's what the family photos showed. All of us squinting into the sun during 4th of July fireworks or crowding around the Christmas tree with matching red sweaters. But if you pressed your ear against our walls, you'd hear the cracks spidering underneath that glossy picture. Shifts stretched longer and longer, 12 hours became 14. Some nights she'd come home after midnight smelling like bleach and latex gloves, her scrub spotted with things she never explained. Dad hated hospitals, so he stayed downstairs, pretending to sleep in front of reruns, the blue light of the TV painting his tired face. Their conversations shrank to clipped exchanges. Where's the car key? Did you pay the bill? Your daughter's essay needs signing. And me, I learned early to play the role. To keep my grades shining, my face polite, my voice level, even when it felt like nobody was really listening. That's where Miss Brown comes in. It was my AP history teacher, the kind of adult who seemed allergic to joy, always straight-backed, lips tight like they'd been glued into a permanent frown. The kind of woman who believed eye contact was respect and silence was obedience. She was obsessed with control in these bizarre ways, your shirt tucked in, your notebook margins neat, but when it came to actually teaching, she coasted. I once slipped a paragraph about SpongeBob SquarePants into a Civil War essay and still walked away with a 98. To my parents, she was perfect. A woman with standards, the kind they admired. Dad would nod approvingly when he saw her stiff posture at parent-teacher nights, while Mom whispered, if more teachers were like her, maybe these kids wouldn't be so soft. But sitting in her classroom was like sitting under a heat lamp, your skin prickled, your instincts screamed, but you forced yourself still. She demanded it. And that's what set up the day everything broke. The cold open of it, the memory that jolts me awake even now, wasn't the sound of gunfire. It wasn't even the frantic announcement over the PA. It was her voice, sharp enough to slice air. Sit down, I didn't approve any lockdown today. Imagine being 17, hearing gunshots echo closer in the hallway, and your teacher, the adult who's supposed to protect you, stands between you and the only thing that might keep you alive. Imagine her blocking the light switch like it was the gates of heaven, like her authority mattered more than our lives. Remember the flicker of fluorescent lights above us? The hum of electricity in the ship tubes, the buzzing so loud it felt like static inside my skull? Every drill since kindergarten had drilled it into us, lights off, silence, hide. We'd practiced so much it felt like muscle memory, but muscle memory collapses when the authority figure in the room sneers at you for trying. The weirdest part, half the class froze, not because they thought she was right, but because 17 years of conditioning had taught us to obey, 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 obey. That's what chills me even more than the gunshots sometimes, the way we almost didn't move. But that day didn't come out of nowhere. Looking back now, I can see the threads. The way Miss Brown picked favorites and enemies with surgical precision, the way she punished dissent but smiled sweetly for the parents of her stars. Take Ben, for example. He was quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of kid who chewed the ends of his pencils until they splintered. She loved him not because of his mind, but because he never argued. He was her model student, the one she paraded in front of visiting parents. Yeah, I wasn't her Annie exactly, but I wasn't her favorite either. I asked too many questions, I noticed too much. When she skipped grading essays, I saw it. When she recycled test questions year after year, I remembered. And then there was Jake Wilson. Jake sat in the back of my sophomore English class, the kid who drew anime characters on his notebook, who spoke so rarely you jumped when he did. Nobody noticed him much, not even me, but Miss Brown noticed him. Noticed and crushed him under her heel. I didn't understand until later, didn't understand that the grades she tanked, the humiliation she delivered weren't random, they were deliberate, a pattern stretching back years. And by the time she was standing at the front of our AP history class, blocking the light switch, the pattern had sharpened into something deadly. But let me not jump too far. That morning the day of the shooting started ordinary, too ordinary. The smell of burnt toast still clinging to my hair because Dad had left the bread in too long. The sound of Mom's car peeling out of the driveway, another double shift at the hospital, my backpack heavy with textbooks, my phone buzzing with a good morning text from Tyler, my boyfriend in chemistry 2 halls over. The hallway smelled like pencil shavings and cheap cafeteria eggs. Kids shoved each other, laughed too loud, lockers slammed shut in metallic rhythms. I remember brushing past Jake in the hall, noticing his hoodie sleeve frayed at the cuff. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd ever see him without a gun in his hand. By the time I sat in Miss Brown's classroom, I was already zoning out, doodling in the corner of my notes. She started one of her tirades about kids these days and respect, her voice droning like an old refrigerator. Then the announcement cracked over the intercom. Lockdown, lockdown, this is not a drill. The words sliced through the room like glass. For a second, we all just blinked at each other, then instinct kicked in. Desks scraped, chairs toppled, kids moved toward the safe corner we'd practiced 100 times. And then her voice. Sharp, cold, absolute. Get back to your desks now. Even now I can replay the whole scene in slow motion. The way she planted herself in front of the light switch like it was her personal altar. The way Ben froze halfway between his desk and the corner, torn apart by fear and loyalty. The way my stomach flipped like a coin, dread on one side, disbelief on the other. I whispered to Miss Brown, we're supposed to. Her eyes snapped to me, blazing with fury. The only procedures you follow are mine. Sit down or you're all getting zeros. Zeros, as if a grade mattered more than bullets. And here, where the family part creeps in, where the cracks from my perfect little household bled into this moment, because my whole life had been about rules, about not disappointing, about keeping everything smooth on the surface no matter how much it hurt underneath. So for a second, a terrifying second, I almost sat back down. That's the moment I still dream about, not the shots, not the screams, that second of hesitation where I nearly let obedience kill me. Because obedience is what Miss Brown thrived on. And in the silence of that classroom, with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the smell of fear sharp as vinegar, something inside me finally snapped. I stood up. Her eyes widened like I'd slapped her. We need to hide now, I said it louder this time, my voice shaking but firm. Her lips curled, sit down or you're expelled. That's when I saw it, not just control, but something uglier behind her eyes, a hunger to be right no matter the cost. I lunged for the light switch. Her hand shot out, gripping my arm, nails digging into my skin. And that's when the first real gunshot echoed down the hall. The first gunshot had barely stopped echoing in the hallway when my mind split in two. Half of me was frozen in the present, the sting of Miss Brown's nails digging into my arm, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry wasps, the taste of iron flooding my mouth from biting down too hard on my tongue. And the other half, it was sliding backward, pulling me through every moment I should noticed, every crack in her mask, every time we all laughed off the wrong things because we thought teachers couldn't possibly be dangerous. Because Miss Brown wasn't a monster in the way you'd expect. She didn't scream obscenities in class or throw textbooks across the room. No, her cruelty was quiet, subtle, the kind that chipped at you day by day until you started wondering if you were the problem. I remember the first time she ever looked at me differently. It was sophomore year, not even in her class yet, just me walking down the hall with a late slip from the office. She stood in the doorway of room 203, her thin lips twisted into that almost smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Running late, are we?" she said, her voice sharp enough to cut skin. I held out the slip like a shield. I was in the nurse's office. Her eyes flicked to the paper, then to me. "Excuses, they'll drown you if you don't learn to swim." Should've been nothing, just a passing comment, but the way he said it, like she was diagnosing me instead of teasing, left a chill in my chest. Later that week, she stopped me again. "You asked too many questions in class," she told me flatly, even though she wasn't my teacher yet. "Curiosity isn't always a virtue, sometimes it's just noise." It was bizarre. Who tells a 15-year-old that? I shrugged it off. I had friends who thought she was hilarious with her old school discipline and snappy comebacks. Parents adored her, administrators praised her, so maybe it was me, maybe I was too sensitive. But then Jake Wilson happened. Jake was the kind of kid people didn't notice until it was too late. He sat in the back, hoodie pulled low, sketching anime characters with careful practice strokes. His notebooks were full of swords and eyes and battle scenes instead of lecture notes. He didn't raise his hand, didn't join clubs, didn't go to football games. But Miss Brown noticed him. Oh, she noticed. She had this way of singling kids out like a hawk circling above, waiting for the weakest one, and once she picked you, it was relentless. With Jake, it started small. She'd call on him when she knew he didn't have the answer, roll her eyes when he stuttered, smirk when the class laughed. Then it escalated. She accused him of plagiarism on an essay, even though he'd written it in front of me during study hall. She gave him a failing grade and told him in front of everyone that some people just aren't cut out for serious academics. I'll never forget the look on his face, not anger, not defiance, just this hollow, defeated emptiness, like she'd scooped something out of him and tossed it in the trash. I told myself it was unfair but not fatal. Teachers had favorites, teachers had grudges, it wasn't new. But Miss Brown had a way of making her grudges permanent. Flash forward to junior year, the first week of school. I was finally in her AP history class. I sat front row, notebook open, determined to impress her despite those earlier digs. I still believed I could win her over, prove I wasn't noise. She handed back our first essays. Mine came back with a red 98 scrawled across the top. No comments, no corrections, not even a check mark, just a number. First, I was thrilled, 98, but then I realized she hadn't actually read it. I'd snuck a paragraph about SpongeBob into the middle just to test her. She didn't notice. And that was her pattern. She demanded order, demanded silence, demanded respect, but when it came to doing her actual job, she coasted. We were props in her theater of control. And kids like Jake, they were her villains. He came to her class one day with a sketchbook and she confiscated it immediately. "Distractions are poison," she announced. She kept it on her desk for a week, flipping through it like evidence. When she finally returned it, half the pages were ripped out. He never spoke about it, just walked around quieter than before. At home, I started noticing how my parents echoed her. "Dad, kids these days can't handle criticism." "Mom, a strict teacher builds character, you'll thank her later." I tried explaining what she'd said to Jake, how she humiliated him in front of everyone. Mom waved it off. If he can't handle a little pressure, how's he going to survive the real world? Pressure, that's what they called it. But it wasn't pressure, it was cruelty. And it was the kind of cruelty that grew roots. I didn't realize until much later that Jake filed a formal complaint against her, that he wrote out in detail how she targeted him, broke him down piece by piece. The complaint vanished in some sealed file, no action taken. But back then, all I saw was a boy fading into the background while the rest of us tried to survive her moods. And me, I learned how to walk her tightrope, never too quiet, never too bold, praise her when she ranted about kids these days, nod along when she bragged about teaching for 25 years. It worked mostly, until the day of the lockdown when survival meant defying her. I keep replaying the moments when she could chosen differently. Like the time she told us, drills are designed to scare you into obedience, don't let fear be your master. We all laughed nervously thinking she was just being edgy, but she wasn't joking. She genuinely believed fear was weakness, that the procedures we practiced were nonsense. And she carried that belief straight into a real shooting. But the thing about flashbacks is they don't just show you the cracks in someone else, they show you the cracks in yourself. Because here's the truth, I wanted her approval. Even after everything, even after watching her shred Jake's confidence, even after seeing her ignore our essays, even after feeling the sting of her words in my own chest. Some part of me thought if I followed the rules hard enough, maybe I'll be safe. That's the poison she planted in us, that obedience equals safety. And that's why half my classmates froze when she told us to sit back down, because we'd spent years learning that her word was law, no matter what the world outside the classroom said. The night before the shooting, I remember sitting at the kitchen table flipping through for an AP quiz. Mom leaned over, still in her scrubs, exhaustion pulling at her face. "You'll do fine," she said absently, scrolling through her phone. Dad walked in, muttering about a busted transmission he'd worked on all day. He dropped into his chair, cracked open a beer, and said, "Don't let that brown woman scare you too much tomorrow. She's tough, but she's not wrong." I almost told him then about Jake, about the way she made us feel small, but I swallowed it, kept the peace. Because in my house, like in her classroom, silence was survival. And that silence carried us all into that May morning. Carried us into the smell of burnt toast, the text from Tyler, the buzzing fluorescent lights. Carried us straight into a classroom where survival demanded disobedience. And yet when the first gunshot rang out and Miss Brown tightened her grip on my arm, half the class still stayed frozen in their desks. Because control was her religion. And we were her congregation. But here's what I didn't know then. Miss Brown's obsession with control wasn't just about us. It stretched back years, through sealed complaints, silent students, and administrators who looked the other way. And when the truth started spilling out after the shooting, we realized the most terrifying question of all. Had she always been this way? Or did she know exactly what she was doing? The hallway smelled like burnt plastic and fear. That's the only way I can describe it. My body was crouched in the corner with 22 other kids, knees knocking against cold linoleum, hearts hammering so loud it felt like the room itself was vibrating, but my mind, it was failing. Miss Brown was still standing at her desk, arms crossed, fury etched deep into the lines around her mouth. We had barricaded the door with desks and chairs, ignoring her protests, but she didn't move to help, didn't crouch with us, didn't even flinch when the doorknob rattled. She was waiting for what I'll never know. The gunshots outside had grown louder, clearer. They weren't firecrackers, they weren't drama class rehearsals, they were real. Each one cracked through the air like God slamming his fist against metal, and still she acted like we were hysterical children. But hysteria doesn't explain the text lighting up my phone. Tyler hiding in supply closet, shooter near lab. Ben's friend under's desk, they turned off lights, silent. Another classmate main office barricaded, don't move. Evidence stacked on top of evidence, and still Miss Brown blocked the light switch like her reputation depended on it. And maybe it did. The SWAT team came 40 minutes later, 40 minutes. By then 2 kids lay dead in the math hallway, 3 more were in critical condition, and our classroom reeked of sweat and panic. When the officers finally burst in, rifles raised, they found us trembling in the corner and Miss Brown standing tall at her desk lecturing us about discipline. They pulled us out one by one. The sunlight outside was blinding, the air sharp with the smell of cut grass and exhaust fumes from idling police cars. Parents screamed names, reporters shoved microphones forward, sirens wailed in the distance. Mom broke through the crowd, her scrubs still splattered with God knows what from the hospital. Her mascara was streaked, her face wet with tears as she clutched me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. She kept whispering, "You're safe, you're safe, you're safe," even though my whole body shook like I'd been dropped into freezing water. But even in that chaos, even with my dad guiding us to the truck in silence, I couldn't stop replaying her voice in my head. "Sit down or you're expelled." The days that followed blurred together. News vans camped outside our school. Photos of Jake Wilson's pale face plastered every channel, his yearbook smile stretched into something tragic. Candlelight vigils flickered on the football field, teddy bears piled at the front gate. And through it all, Miss Brown appeared calm. She stood in her driveway for interviews, claiming she had maintained control during chaos, that her refusal to panic kept us alive. Alive? My phone buzzed nonstop with classmates sharing their stories. Tyler's video from his supply closet spread online, shaky footage of kids holding each other's hands while muffled bangs echoed in the background. Ben's cousin posted about how our lights were still on when every other classroom had gone dark. And then the real questions started crawling across the internet like wildfire. What kind of teacher refuses to protect her students during a school shooting? That's when the confrontation began. Detective Santos showed up at our house on day 3. She wore a navy blazer, badge glinting at her hip, notepad in her hand. She crouched in front of me on the couch, lowering herself to eye level. "Walk me through everything," she said gently. Her pen scratched across the page as I described the announcements, the buzzing lights, Miss Brown's words, her grip on my arm. When I hesitated, she slid her tablet toward me. Screenshots of my text to Tyler lit the screen. "Henderson won't let us hide," still at desks. 23 other students had already said the same. Santos's voice softened. "You're brave for speaking up, but we need every detail. Don't protect her if she didn't protect you." The words hit like a hammer, because protecting adults, even when they didn't deserve it, was something I'd been trained to do my whole life. Mom always said, "Don't embarrass us in public." Dad always warned, "Keep your head down, respect authority." But now authority had nearly gotten me killed. At school, the chaos deepened. Parents stormed meetings demanding answers. Some shouted that Miss Brown had saved us by keeping order. Others screamed that she had endangered us. The community fractured overnight, half calling her a hero, half calling her a criminal. And me, I just kept asking myself one question. If I hadn't turned off those lights, would we all be dead? That question stuck to my ribs like a shard of glass, sharp and unmovable. On day 6, the school district held a community meeting at the Civic Center. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sweat as hundreds packed into folding chairs. The moment Miss Brown entered with her union rep, the room erupted. Parents shouting, reporters scribbling, cameras flashing. She stood there, spine straight, chin raised, repeating her mantra. I followed my professional judgment. That's when someone threw a water bottle. It smacked the wall behind her, exploding into a spray of plastic and droplets. Security rushed her out, forming a circle as parents screamed for her arrest. And I realized something chilling. She wasn't shaken, not even then. If anything, she looked satisfied. Back at home, my phone buzzed with a call from Detective Santos. "Has Miss Brown ever mentioned Jake Wilson to you?" My stomach dropped. Jake, the boy who sketched in the back, the boy she'd humiliated. "No," I whispered, "not to me." But the detective's voice was grim. "We're finding a history here, complaints, incidents, none of it ever made public. If you remember anything even small, you need to tell us." I hung up and stared at the wall, heart pounding. Because it hit me then. This wasn't just about a teacher who made a bad call in a crisis. This was about a teacher who had been warned, who had a history. And we'd all been kept in the dark. The week dragged on. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. Every motorcycle outside made me flinch. Tyler came over, his knees still bruised from hiding in the chemical storage closet. We sat at the picnic table in my backyard, his voice flat as he said, "I thought you were dead." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there tracing the splinters in the wood while the summer air pressed heavy around us. Inside, Mom was on the phone with a lawyer. Dad stayed silent, staring at the muted TV where Miss Brown's face filled the screen again. The perfect family picture was cracking wide open. Then came the biggest blow. Channel 8 aired a cell phone video from Mr.'s classroom across the hall. The footage was dark, silent kids crouched under desks, holding their breath. And through the walls, clear as day, you could hear Miss Brown's voice. "This paranoia is exactly what social media has done to you." The timestamp, 2:47 p.m. The exact moment she was blocking our light switch. The video hit 50,000 views in 2 hours. Comments poured in, brutal and unforgiving. And in that moment, the narrative shifted. No longer strict teacher save kids. Now it was teacher endanger students during active shooter. But the worst part wasn't the news or the lawyers or the internet. The worst part was Ben. He came over one afternoon, his mom dropping him off because he couldn't stop shaking. We sat on my porch swing, silence stretching between us until he finally blurted, "I almost stayed seated because I was more afraid of her than the shooter." His hands trembled as he said it, his voice cracked. And I realized I wasn't the only one who hesitated. Her authority had almost killed all of us. The district attorney's press conference came on a Wednesday morning, a week after the shooting. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the smell of Dad's burnt coffee clinging to the air, Mom pecking with her phone clutched tight in her hand. The news anchor's voice was solemn, the kind they use when announcing casualties from a storm. Then the DA stepped up to the microphone, gray suit, tired eyes, a folder so thick it looked ready to burst. After reviewing preliminary evidence, he said, "We are opening a criminal investigation into Brown for reckless endangerment of minors." The words slammed into my chest like another gunshot. Reckless endangerment, for me, for Ben, for Tyler, for all 23 of us crammed into room 203. Mom covered her mouth with her hand, Dad swore under his breath, low and sharp. And me, I just kept hearing her voice echoing against the inside of my skull. "Sit down or you're expelled." The days after that blurred into chaos. News vans parked at the end of our street, cameras glinting under the summer sun. Strangers on Facebook called us liars, attention seekers, crisis hackers. School, the hallway still smelled of industrial cleaner, sharp and chemical, but the bloodstains were gone. Only the tape outlines remained. I walked past room 203 once just to see. The crime scene tape crisscrossed the door, the fluorescent light still flickering weakly behind the glass. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. That's when Ben grabbed my arm, his face was pale, eyes shadowed. "They found more," he whispered. "More what?" "Complaints about her from years ago." His voice cracked and they were all buried. The revelation spread fast. Sealed file from 2021, Jake Wilson's complaint against Miss Brown citing psychological abuse. Another from 2018, a student claiming she manipulated grades as punishment. Even one from 2009, vague but damning, a transfer to our district after a student at her old school attempted suicide and named her in the note. Administrators had buried it all, protected her because her students' test scores were high, because parents admired her discipline, because tenure wrapped her like armor. And now 2 kids were dead, 3 more in hospitals, and 23 of us carried scars that would never fade. The night the details broke, my phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. "Backyard." I slipped outside, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and damp earth. He was already there, hunched on the picnic table, his face pale under the porch light. "She knew," he said without looking at me. His voice was flat like he'd rehearsed it 100 times. "She had to know Jake hated her, and she still kept us out in the open." I sat beside him, our knees brushing. Why would she do that? Finally, he turned to me, eyes hollow, because control was more important than us. The silence that followed was heavier than the summer air. The lawsuits began the next day. Parents filing civil suits, lawyers circling like vultures, reporters digging into every scrap of her career. And Miss Brown, she doubled down. She appeared on a podcast called Truth and Education, painting herself as the victim of woke hysteria. She used my name, my full name. "She's a troubled student," Miss Brown said, her voice smooth and cold. "Always seeking attention. This narrative about me endangering them, it's fabricated. Kids these days panic too easily." My hands shook as I listened. My stomach churned. She twisted my grandmother's funeral into skipping class for fun. She called me weak. Within hours, strangers spammed my Instagram. Liar, crisis actor, drum queen. Someone even found my mom's work number and called the nurse's station, asking if she was proud of raising a daughter who destroys lives. I locked myself in my room, lights off, blanket pulled over my head. And I thought maybe I should stay silent, maybe I shouldn't have fought her that day. But then I remembered the rattling doorknobs, the shadow under the door, the being real or imagined on the other side. If I stayed silent, we'd all be dead. 2 days later, the police showed up at Daniel's house. Daniel had been hiding in the main office during the shooting, pressed behind the secretary's desk where he could see the security monitors. He recorded the whole thing on his phone without even realizing it. The footage was grainy, shaky, but clear enough. Miss Brown walking calmly down the hall after the first shots rang out, not ducking, not running, just strolling phone in hand while other teachers dragged students into classrooms. The timestamp 3 minutes after Jake fired his first shot. When the footage leaked, it spread like wildfire. Brown, who trended overnight, comment sections exploded. And for the first time, even her supporters began to falter. At the same time, the survivors started speaking out. One by one, we posted on Tik, Instagram, YouTube telling our side. I made a video at 3:00 a.m., my phone propped against a desk lamp. I read from the transcript of that day, syncing her words with the sound of gunshots in the background. "I didn't approve any lockdown drill today, bang. Sit down or you're all getting zeros, bang bang. You're all being hysterical, bang." My hands trembled the whole time, my voice shook, but I posted it anyway. By noon, it had 2 million views. The kids joined in, showing how their teachers had protected them, Mrs. getting everyone under desks in 8 seconds, Mr. barricading the door before the second announcement, Coach Williams literally carrying 2 freshmen into the equipment room. And then there was us, room 203. The classroom where survival had meant defying our teacher. The pressure built like a storm. The DA upgraded the charges, 23 counts of reckless endangerment of a minor. When Miss Brown turned herself in, cameras captured every second, her navy suit, her teaching awards pinned to her lapel like medals, her chin high, her smile tight. Bail was set at $50,000, her supporters raised it in just over 2 hours. She walked free, still smiling. And when she paused in front of the cameras, she said one word that made my blood run cold. "Vindication." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every second of that day, the way she looked at us, arms crossed, while bullets rang through the hall. Was she really that blind, that arrogant, or had she made a choice? That's the question that gnawed at me. Did she keep us exposed because she refused to admit she was wrong, or because she wanted to prove she was right no matter the cost? The shocking impact moment wasn't just the shooting, it wasn't even her arrest. It was the realization that our survival had been an accident. Because Miss Brown wasn't trying to protect us, she wasn't trying to kill us either. She just didn't care enough to choose. And that indifference, that willingness to gamble our lives against her ego, was worse than either option. The hospital smelled like bleach and stale coffee, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes, clings to your hair, follows you home. It set up a triage unit in the gym the night of the shooting, but in the days that followed, the survivors and families were funneled through the hospital's maze of beige walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. I remember sitting on an exam table, paper crinkling beneath me, my legs bouncing so hard the nurse asked if I'd had too much caffeine. "No," I said, "just adrenaline." But it wasn't adrenaline, it was fear, lingering, gnawing, impossible to shake. They ran x-rays on my arm, the one Miss Brown had grabbed. Her nails had dug crescents into my skin, but deeper down, the twist of her grip had left bruising that bloomed like ink across the bone. The doctor pointed at the gray film, tapping with his pen. Nothing broken, he said gently, but the tissue's inflamed, you'll be sore for weeks. Weeks, he said it like it was good news. But the physical marks didn't scare me. It was the invisible ones, the ones that pulsed every time a door slammed or a car backfired, that made me feel like I'd never be whole again. Tyler wasn't so lucky. He bruised both knees, shoving himself behind the chemical storage shelves in the lab closet. Purple and black patches climbed up his legs, ugly reminders of the hours he'd spent crouched in silence. When I visited him, the antiseptic smell of his hospital room hit me like a wall. He sat propped up in bed, his face pale, his eyes too old for 17. They keep asking me to talk about it, he said flatly, picking at the frayed edge of his blanket. But when I close my eyes, all I hear is the shots, and your voice saying Henderson won't let us hide. I sat beside him, my chest tightening. You survived, I whispered. His eyes flicked to mine, haunted. Did we, or are we just waiting for it to happen again? That question stalked me through every hallway of that hospital. Ben had been checked for heart irregularities after collapsing from panic attacks. Maria, one of the quiet girls in our class, was put on oxygen because she hyperventilated until she fainted. Another boy hadn't spoken a single word since that day, his silence heavy as stone. We were alive, but we weren't whole. And then came the evidence. The lawyer my mom had hired met us in a small conference room at the hospital. The walls buzzed with fluorescent lights, the table smelled faintly of disinfectant wipes. She spread manila folders across the surface, each one labeled with a name. These are the medical reports, she explained, her voice calm but firm. We need them for both the civil and criminal cases. They show the physical harm, yes, but more importantly, the psychological. She slid a folder toward me, my name scrawled in black marker across the tab. Inside, copies of my x-rays, notes about trauma responses, even the nurse's observation about my shaking legs. This isn't just about broken bones, said. It's about the damage you carry forward, panic attacks, nightmares, PTSD, that's evidence too. I swallowed hard, staring at the words post-traumatic stress symptoms likely. Evidence, my fear had become evidence. But there was something else, something buried in those files that changed everything. When the doctors examined the students who'd been injured in the math hallway, the ones who hadn't made it to safety in time, they found something chilling. One girl had been grazed by a bullet that tore through her classroom door. Her teacher had followed lockdown procedures immediately, lights off, kids hidden, door barricaded, and still the bullet found its way inside. But in room 203, with our lights blazing with Miss Brown blocking us from hiding, not one bullet entered, not one. It wasn't luck. The shooter had passed our door. And the DA's office wanted to know why. Detective Santos came to see me again, this time with another specialist, a woman in a tailored suit who introduced herself as Dr. Mills, a crisis response expert. She carried a thick binder, her glasses sliding down her nose as she flipped through pages of evidence. She pointed at a timeline printed in bold letters. The shooter, Jake Wilson, fired down the science wing, looped past the office, then moved toward history. He fired at several locked, darkened classrooms, but when he reached room 203, she paused, looking at me. He kept walking. My skin prickled because our lights were still on. Exactly. She closed the binder with a snap. Locked dark rooms signal resistance. A lit room looks occupied but unprepared, vulnerable, and in some cases, shooters pass by because they're looking for easy targets or because they recognize what's behind that door. Her eyes locked on mine. We believe Jake knew exactly who was in room 203. The words landed like a blow. Jake, Miss Brown, the complaints, the humiliation. Did he walk past because he didn't want us, because he only wanted her? Or worse, because he thought she'd already done the job for him by keeping us exposed? The hospital became less about healing and more about questions. Parents whispered in hallways, clutching their children's files like lifelines. Reporters lingered outside, snapping photos of every tear, every stumble. And in the middle of it all, Miss Brown gave another statement to the press. I never believed my students were in real danger, she said, her chin raised, her eyes cold. I knew it was a drill, and I was right, they're all alive. Alive? Like the two students in the math hallway weren't dead, like the three in ICU weren't fighting for their lives, like we weren't shaking, broken, barely hanging on. That night, Mom sat at the kitchen table with stacks of paper spread between them. Dad hovered in the doorway, silent as always. She's delusional, Mom said, her voice sharp with rage. She still thinks she did the right thing. Tapped her pen against the folders. Delusional or not, the evidence is clear. She endangered those kids, and these medical reports prove the damage runs deeper than she'll ever admit. She looked at me, her expression softening. But the jury won't just need evidence, they'll need a story, your story. The idea of testifying made my stomach twist. The thought of facing her again, of hearing her voice in the same room, made my chest tighten until I couldn't breathe. But was right. If we didn't speak, she'd control the narrative again. In the hospital waiting room, Tyler squeezed my hand. His palms were clammy, his grip trembling, but his eyes were steady. We have to tell it, he said, everything, even the parts that make us look weak. I nodded, tears burning hot in my eyes, because that was the hardest part. Admitting that I almost sat back down, that obedience nearly killed me, that part of me still wished even now that following the rules had been enough. But it was. And the truth was the only weapon we had left. The truth has a way of sitting heavy in your chest like a secret you can't swallow. The hospital gave us proof, sure, x-rays, reports, diagnoses stamped with official signatures, but evidence is cold, truth is hot, it burns until you speak it. And in my family, speaking truth had never been our specialty. At home, things cracked wide open. Dad stopped watching TV in the evenings. He just sat in his chair, staring at the floor, beer untouched on the table. Mom threw herself deeper into calls with her voice sharp and brittle, her sentences cutting like knives. But whenever the conversation turned to me testifying, the air grew colder. Do you understand what it means? Dad asked one night, his voice low. If you speak against her, you'll be dragged through the mud. People will say you're exaggerating or lying. You'll be on camera in the papers online. Mom cut in, her arms crossed tight. She used your name already. You think staying quiet will protect you? Silence is what she's counting on. They went back and forth, voices rising, until finally Dad snapped. What if she's right? What if it's just? He stopped, but the damage was done. I felt the words anyway. What if it's just dramatic, just weak, just noise? Miss Brown's poison in my own father's mouth. That night, Tyler came over. We sat in my driveway, the summer air thick and buzzing with cicadas. He fiddled with the zipper of his hoodie before finally blurting it out. My mom doesn't want me involved anymore. She says the lawsuit's tearing the town apart. She wants me to drop it. My chest clenched, and what do you want? His eyes met mine, fierce despite the tremor in his voice. I want to tell the truth, I don't know if I'm strong enough. I swallowed hard, me neither. We sat there in silence, both of us shaking, both of us holding on to each other like the truth might crush us if we let go. The real breaking point came at school board headquarters. They called a special hearing. Parents packed into the auditorium, the air hot and stale, the smell of sweat and old paper sharp in my nose. Miss Brown's lawyer stood at the podium, flanked by 3 of her former students, now adults in suits, praising her discipline and commitment to education. One was even a state senator. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, applause erupted from her supporters. Then it was our turn. Nudged me forward, my legs felt like jelly, my throat dry. The microphone loomed in front of me, too big, too loud. I opened my mouth and froze. Every instinct screamed at me to sit back down, to keep the peace, to stay safe. That's when Ben stood up beside me. His voice shook, but he spoke anyway. She told us to stay seated while shots were going off. I almost listened. I almost died because of her. The room erupted. Some cheered, some shouted him down, but his words were out there, alive, unstoppable. And I realized I couldn't stay silent any longer. When it was my turn again, I gripped the microphone with both hands. My palms were slick with sweat, my knees knocking. She said we were being hysterical, I whispered at first. Then louder, she blocked the light switch. She threatened us with zeros while bullets echoed in the hallway, and I know this because I was the one who turned the lights off. Gasps rippled through the room, camera shutters clicked. Miss Brown's lawyer objected, called it the emotional ramblings of a traumatized teen. But the truth was out now, and no lawyer could stuff it back in. That night at home, Dad wouldn't look at me. He sat at the table, his hands clasped, his jaw tight. You embarrassed us, he muttered finally. You don't understand how small towns work. People remember things like this, they hold grudges. Mom slammed her hand against the counter. She saved 23 kids by disobeying that woman. If you can't see that, you're blind. Dad's silence stretched thick across the room. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to bridge the gap. The confession didn't come from me. It came from Miss Brown herself. 2 weeks later, the FBI enhanced the security audio. On the footage at timestamp 9:47 a.m., just after the first shots, her voice came through crystal clear. If this is real, they deserve what they get for not respecting me. Juror gasped, reporters scrambled to tweet, parents in the gallery shouted, their voices echoing against courtroom walls. And in that moment, every doubt, every hesitation, every accusation that we were exaggerating burned away. She had said it out loud. The courtroom buzzed with fury, fear, disbelief. And I realized something terrifying. She hadn't just endangered us by accident. She had made a choice. The fallout at home was brutal. Dad avoided me entirely, slipping out early, coming home late. When I confronted him, his face crumpled, but he didn't apologize. I just wanted to keep you safe, he muttered. By keeping me silent, by siding with her. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I packed a bag and stayed at Tyler's for the weekend. His parents made pancakes, his mom fussed over me, his dad clapped me on the shoulder like I was family. And for the first time since the shooting, I felt like maybe the truth didn't have to destroy me. Maybe it could set me free. The real test came with the victim impact statements. Spread papers across her office table, her pen tapping against the wood. The jury will decide sentencing, but your words will decide how they see her. Don't hold back. I stared at the blank page. My pen hovered, trembling. How do you sum up 47 minutes of fear? How do you explain the sound of breathing under a door, the smell of sweat and terror, the voice of the person meant to protect you telling you to sit down or be expelled? Finally, I wrote, she taught me that authority without care is just cruelty, that rules without compassion are just cages, that I'd rather be expelled than dead. Not as she read, that's it, that's the truth. Healing wasn't a straight line. Everyone kept saying that, therapists, teachers, even the lady at the church who pressed a casserole dish into my mom's arms. But they didn't see what it was really like. The nights where I jolted awake drenched in sweat because a door slammed too hard, the mornings where my fingers shook so bad I could barely zip my backpack, the way I memorized every exit in every building every time. Normal was gone. And yet somehow life kept moving forward. Therapy became a lifeline. Doctor's office smelled faintly of lavender and printer ink with a little white noise machine hissing in the corner. At first I hated being there, hated talking, hated dragging the memories back out into daylight. But week after week, I started to feel less like I was falling. One session, she asked me to close my eyes and imagine room 203 again, but instead of freezing in that moment, she told me to rewrite it. What would you do differently, she asked. I pictured myself flipping the lights faster, pulling Ben by the sleeve sooner, shouting louder. And then she said, what if you did enough already? The words cracked something open inside me. For the first time, I let myself believe it might be true. At school, things changed too. The board finally revoked Miss Brown's teaching license permanently. She wouldn't set foot in a classroom again, but her shadow lingered in the halls. Kids whispered, parents argued at board meetings, teachers looked over their shoulders like they were being graded. The memorial classroom opened that November. They left the desks as they were that day, a corner barricaded, paper scattered, chairs tipped over, a plaque hung by the door in memory of Michael and who never made it home. I stood there, hand pressed against the cold metal of the doorknob, breathing in the sharp scent of fresh paint mixed with something older, something sour. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to step inside. And I whispered, we didn't forget you. Tyler and I clung to each other through it all. He deferred his college acceptance, said he couldn't leave me to face this alone. His parents weren't thrilled, but they didn't stop him. We had this ritual now. Every Friday we'd meet at the coffee shop. Same corner booth, same chipped mug of hot chocolate between us. We didn't always talk about the shooting, but it was always there like a ghost at the table. One night he reached across and took my hand. We survived, he said softly, that has to mean something. For the first time, I believed him. The sentencing came 3 months later. I sat in the courtroom, sweaty palms clutching my victim impact statement. Families filled the rows, eyes red and swollen. The air smelled like nerves and too strong coffee. Miss Brown stood tall in her gray suit, her jaw tight, her eyes blazing even as the judge read out, 18 years, parole possible after 12. Her face didn't crack until the cuffs clicked shut. That was when I saw it, the flicker of fear, the moment she realized control was gone. She turned her head and for the first time didn't look at us like we were her students. She looked at us like we were the reason she was caged. And maybe we were. Life after the trial was quieter but not easier. I started at State University that fall. My roommate didn't know anything about me beyond my name and major. For a while, it felt good to just be not the girl from room 203. But silence was heavy too. I caught myself checking the locks 3 times before bed, scanning lecture halls for exits, flinching when someone shouted too loudly. Trauma wasn't just a scar, it was a shadow that followed me everywhere. But there were moments of light. Ben gave a speech at the spring school board meeting. He stood tall, voice steady, and said, "No student should ever have to choose between their grades and their life." The applause was thunderous. Started volunteering at the community center, helping other parents navigate grief and fear. Dad and I weren't the same, we might never be, but one night he sat on the porch with me, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I'm sorry." It wasn't everything, but it was something. And me, I decided to study education policy because someone needed to make sure stories like ours never happened again. At first, I thought I was too broken for it, that I'd never be strong enough to stand in classrooms again. But maybe strength wasn't about being unshaken, maybe it was about standing anyway. Year after the shooting, they asked me to speak at the memorial service. I stood at the podium, the crowd stretching out in front of me, candles flickering in the dusk. I told them about room 203, about fear and defiance and survival, about how we weren't just students that day, we were our own protectors when the adults failed us. And I ended with this. Authority without care is cruelty, rules without compassion are cages, and survival sometimes means standing when you're told to sit. That day we learned the hardest truth of all, sometimes the people meant to protect you are the ones who put you in danger. But we also learned that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a 17-year-old flipping a light switch in the dark. And when I look back, I don't just see Miss Brown's face or hear the echo of gunshots. I see Ben's shaky voice becoming strong, Tyler's hand squeezing mine, my mom's fury turned into fight. We were broken, yes, but we weren't destroyed. We were more than what happened in room 203. We were the kids who refused to stay in our seats when standing up meant staying alive.